it's really up to the United Kingdom to agree with Ukraine what the terms are under which UK equipment is going to be used in supporting Ukraine in its efforts to push back against Russian aggression. And that's where I think you'll find the fundamental point of agreement between Washington and London is that we need to do everything we can to support Ukraine as it preserves its freedom, defends its territorial integrity, fights back against the kind of aggression that we haven't seen on the European continent in many, many decades.
I'm joined now by Matthew Palmer, Charge d'Affaires of the United States to the UK. Mr. Palmer, thank you very much for coming on to Times Radio today. If I could start by asking you, we've had 6 weeks of Sir Keir Starmer as the UK Prime Minister. Has that now allowed for a reset in the special relationship between Washington and London?
I don't think that I'd use the word reset there. This is a relationship that is a unique, privileged partnership. We have a remarkably close, positive relationship.
A special relationship?
It is a special relationship. And I know that can come across sometimes as a cliche when people talk about it, but it's true. And there's other words that you could use. We sometimes talk about the essential relationship or the essential partnership. In my experience, it is a unique and privileged relationship. It's like no other relationship I've ever worked on in 32 years in government. We are integrated into UK institutions. HMG is integrated into American institutions. It can be a little bit difficult at times to find the point where our institutions stop and your institutions begin. But within just a few days of becoming Prime Minister, Keir Starmer was in Washington meeting with President Biden in the Oval Office. I wasn't there, but my boss, Ambassador Hartley, was, and she told me that it was a warm meeting and the two men got on very well. They have a good, close relationship. Prime Minister Starmer's government, the people who are in it in senior positions are well and favorably known to us. This is a good, close partnership we have with this government. We also worked well with the previous government and the government before that. You can go back in time quite a long way.
It doesn't change.
Well, it does change because the world changes, right? And the circumstances evolve and change. But the partnership, the close relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom is predicated on shared interests, shared values, remarkable people-to-people ties. Whether you've got a Republican or a Democratic administration in Washington, a Labour or a Tory government in the United Kingdom, the close, essential, special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom is enduring.
In terms of that special relationship and the importance of that special relationship, nowhere, of course, is more important. That's what's going on the fringes of Europe in Ukraine. And the British government has taken the decision to supply Challenger tanks to Ukrainian forces to be used within Russian territory. That's a move that's fully endorsed by the United States, that you're working in tandem to take what is quite a significant action.
Well, it's really up to the United Kingdom to agree with Ukraine what the terms are under which UK equipment is going to be used in supporting Ukraine in its efforts to push back against Russian aggression. And that's where I think you'll find the fundamental point of agreement between Washington and London is that we need to do everything we can to support Ukraine as it preserves its freedom, defends its territorial integrity, fights back against the kind of aggression that we haven't seen on the European continent in many, many decades.
And would that extend to things like the Storm Shadow missiles? There's been some speculation here in the UK that these missiles have a particularly long range. They could potentially hit towns on the outskirts of Moscow, but we haven't been able to supply those missiles to Ukrainian forces for fear that it could escalate the situation. That's something that the United States wouldn't support. Is that right?
Well, I think it's really a function of the conversations between London and Kyiv about the nature of the equipment that the United States, the particulars of the equipment that the UK is going to provide and the terms under which it can be employed. So I'm not going to insert myself into that
but
conversation.
it is of concern to. Is it of concern to the United States? I mean, you're the lead, right? You guys are the people in charge of this in terms of managing the broader support for the broader support for President Zelensky in Ukraine.
I wouldn't describe it that way. This is more a partnership. This is the United States working closely with our allies, as allies, as partners in support of a common shared objective. So the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, France, the Netherlands, other countries that have been strongly supportive of not just President Zelensky, but of Ukraine and Ukraine's right to defend itself against this kind of aggression. We've been providing equipment, and the United States has provided the lion's share of that equipment. But support broadly construed, the United States has been maybe one of the most significant contributors, but other countries have also really stepped up and provided significant resources and support for Ukraine.
Are you confident this is a war that the West can win, NATO can win against Vladimir Putin?
Let me be very clear on this point. NATO is not at war with Vladimir Putin. The West is not at war with Russia. Ukraine is fighting Russia because Ukraine was invaded by Russia. The United States, the West, NATO, the United Kingdom, we are supporting Ukraine in pushing back against that aggression. But the idea that this is somehow a war between the strategic West and Russia with Ukraine as an instrument of that, I think does a deep disservice to the Ukrainian people.
Let me rephrase that. Is it really important that this is a war that Ukraine wins?
Absolutely.
And when you say absolutely, do you think that the future of Europe is on the line here?
I think there are some very important principles that have underpinned decades of peace, stability, and prosperity in Europe that Russian aggression threatens. And it is important that Ukraine is victorious in this conflict. It is important that we do everything we can to support Ukraine and encourage and support an outcome that is favorable to our shared interests in a system that is rules-based, in a European framework that is predicated on cooperation and not on conflict.
Do you think there's a danger that were Vladimir Putin to emerge victorious, or at least take a proportion of Ukraine, that he would feel emboldened, that you could have the likes of China suddenly step in and think, well, if Putin can do this in Ukraine, we can do this with Taiwan, we could see Iran emboldened, and then, but going back to Russia, that we could see a Russian president who actually wants to have a pop at one of the NATO countries?
That's certainly a risk. And I don't want to predict what the specific consequences would be of Russian victory, however you might choose to define it, in Ukraine. But I am confident in saying that the consequences of that would be negative for our interests. And I can't tell you in particular what would flow from it, but it would certainly be an environment that would not be conducive to American interests, to British interests, to European interests, and our shared interest in a system that is predicated on a cooperative approach to shared security challenges.
When you talk about those shared interests, can you be more specific?
Well, one of the fundamental principles of the post-war world is that borders should not be changed by force. And what Russia is doing right now is fundamentally at odds with that. And once you establish that you can successfully use force to change facts on the ground and change international borders, what flows from that is deeply threatening to global stability.
Just moving on, you've seen some very concerning scenes, and I'm sure you're well briefed on those, up and down England primarily, with the riots that we've seen. We've also seen, before those riots have taken place, we've seen influencers and Russian bots using social media to spread misinformation as a way of trying to incite the violence. Are the US authorities helping their British counterparts in identifying those responsible and shutting down those responsible?
We certainly have open, transparent, and long-standing conversations, cooperation between the U.S. and UK authorities on the issue of mis and disinformation, and programs and projects in place that are intended to help to combat that. There's very little that we know in that space that we don't share with our UK counterparts, and the same is true of the relationship in the other direction. It's a very hard problem to crack, right? That we, both of us, value freedom of speech. These are our fundamental rights in the United States. It's of fundamental importance in the United Kingdom. How you push back against malign and malevolent and malicious actors who are taking advantage of those freedoms, trying to use them against us, is a huge challenge. It's a political challenge, and it's a social challenge, one that's shared between our two nations.
You'd have heard of somebody called Stephen Yaxley-Lennon, I'm sure, also known as Tommy Robinson. Of course, there's Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK. From the UK, from the US authorities' point of view, do you see those two individuals as being in that bracket of a malign influence trying to spread misinformation and hate?
Look, I don't want to talk about any particular individuals and the positions that they've advocated or adopted. But what I do want to do is to underscore the importance of ensuring that people have access to information that is credible, that they have access to information that is accurate. And when there is misinformation that's being spread, when there is disinformation that is being spread, including in particular by our geopolitical adversaries, that it is possible for people to identify that kind of malign and deliberate misinformation, and making sure that kind of alternative information is available to people is fundamental to that struggle.
One of the individuals, and I don't think he could necessarily go into the same bracket as Tommy Robinson or Nigel Farage, but one of those individuals that's caused Downing Street, Keir Starmer particular problems is Elon Musk, who of course is a US billionaire, very successful owner of X and Tesla, but he's been using his platform and commenting on his platform. Has London expressed concern to you about the influence of Mr. Musk?
I've seen the stuff that's been in the press.
Yeah.
But again, this is fundamentally about freedom of expression, right?
So that's the side of the line you come down on.
People have the right to say what they think. What I'm most concerned about is when you have information that is out there that is incorrect, that is being deliberately disseminated by our geopolitical adversaries for the purpose of stoking social unrest. That is an instrument of policy. And what's important is that activity be exposed for what it is.
And the NSA is working with GCHQ on that.
That I don't want to talk about the particulars.
Okay, I appreciate that. Can we just move on to the Middle East? Can war in the Middle East be avoided?
Absolutely. Right now, we've got our negotiators in Qatar working with the Israelis. The Egyptians and the Qatar authorities are working with us in partnership, trying to reach an agreement and accommodation between Israel and Hamas that would result in a ceasefire, the release of hostages, the release of detainees, and a political process ultimately leading towards a two-state solution. I'm concerned, we are all concerned about the possibility of an Iranian attack on Israel. We're doing everything that we can, again, not in isolation, but in a coordinated approach with our partners and our allies to discourage Iran from taking any such action. But I'm hopeful that we'll be in a position to dissuade Tehran from doing anything that is deeply disturbing or unsettling to the status quo. And I'm hopeful that the negotiations between Israel and Hamas will make progress and an agreement can be reached that results in the ceasefire that we all so desperately want to see.
We're seeing some significant military resource from the United States on its way, if not already in the region. If Tehran was to attack Israel and the US was to step in with the force that we know that it can, would you expect the UK to be at your side?
Listen, I don't want to get into kind of the hypotheticals, but I will say that we're working hand in hand and very closely with our UK counterparts to ensure that we have the shared information picture, to ensure that our response to any provocations on the part of Tehran are coordinated, and that we are doing everything that we can, not just individually, but doing everything that we can as partners and allies to ensure an outcome that's conducive to peace.
And you think that can be, working with your UK allies, you think that can be achieved? Where do you see our Foreign Secretary David Lammy in that equation? Where do you see Keir Starmer? What do you think that they can offer to try and achieve that peace?
Listen, David Lammy, Keir Starmer, the Foreign Secretary, the Prime Minister, these are amongst our closest partners, if not our absolutely closest partners in managing these challenges in the Middle East. It's no coincidence that it's the United States and the United Kingdom that are standing shoulder to shoulder in the Red Sea, working to ensure freedom of commerce and freedom of movement for commercial shipping through that vital international waterway. The United States, the UK, we see things in the region in a very similar way. We have a shared understanding of the path forward, and we are working in close partnership to achieve those shared goals.
Now, I'm sure you're aware the UK government hasn't said anything officially yet, but there is some speculation, educated speculation, that the UK could impose an arms embargo against Israel. If it were to do that, of course, it would have knock-on implications potentially for the F-35 strike fighter program. Is that something that you're warning against the UK implementing an arms embargo against Israel? You'd see that being as counterproductive or something you'd support?
We've certainly had conversations with our UK partners about this, and I'm confident that this is an issue that we could work through.
And the UK will be able to continue to supply arms to Israel?
No, that's not my point.
Well, sorry, what was your point? I've misunderstood, Mr. Palmer.
It'll be up to the
Apologies.
to the UK to adopt the positions and the policies that it chooses to adopt with respect to this particular dynamic. But I'm confident that we can handle some of the challenges that may stem from that, whether it's the F-35 or what other particular issue may be out there. So we've been good and close partners with the United Kingdom throughout this process. And I don't want to speculate about what it is that the UK may choose to do in that space. But where it crosses over into particular U.S. interests, we will consult, we'll work together, we'll find a shared solution.
And you don't think it'll be a particular problem?
I don't know the particulars of how this may shape out, but I'm confident that we can work through this together.
Bro, just finally, what does it mean looking ahead to the future, looking ahead to these elections? You've watched what's happened in the UK. What does it mean going forward for President Biden, for America in the UK, to have somebody like Keir Starmer, a lawyer, a public servant, in number 10, and he has brought, many see him as bringing the UK back to a sort of, after years of turmoil of leaving the European Union, he's brought the UK back to an equilibrium. Is that a view that, Joe Biden and the administration welcomes, his appointment? And you said you didn't want to use the word reset, but that there is a sort of new launch pad for that special relationship?
Again, I don't want to give you the impression that there was ever
of course
problem in the special relationship. I've been here for 2 years in London, which means I've had 4 prime ministers.
That's a little unusual.
It is a little unusual, but the point that I would underscore here is, as we went from prime minister to prime minister, and the people that we would work with, our counterparts, would change over. Yeah. The relationship itself was fundamentally rock solid. Whether it was Boris Johnson or Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak, these were still a good, strong, productive partnership that continues with Prime Minister Starmer. The relationship, the special relationship, is so much deeper than any one government or any one administration.
And final question just on that, does it cut both ways, so that regardless of what happens in November, you're always going to be our closest friends?
I believe that irrespective of who the president is or what party is in power in Washington, whether in the White House or on Capitol Hill, that Washington will continue to see the value in the special relationship with the United Kingdom, the fundamental interests and values that we share, and the priority that we place on working together to address the shared challenges that we see around the world. So yes, I'm confident that no matter what happens in November, this relationship is on firm footing.
Matthew Palmer, Charge d'Affaires from Washington to London, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks very much.